My dear, some wounds don't bleed. They bruise the soul quiet, leaving behind a silence so thick you can almost hear it echo. This story, I was kicked out after my brother cried fake tears. Well, now it's a tale about masks. The ones people wear to steal sympathy, and the ones we're forced to shed just to survive. If you find comfort in stories that stir the heart and reckon with hard truths, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe, leave me a comment, and share this tale with someone who knows the sting of being wronged by blood. Now let me take you back to a time when justice came not with a gavel, but with grit, tears, and the truth laid bare. The gavel cracked once, sharp as a gunshot. My brother's face twisted, not from shame, but from the sudden realization that his stage had collapsed. The courtroom air turned brittle as his crocodile tears dried mid-cheek. He was cornered, caged by the very lies he once weaponized. Folks say family's supposed to be your backbone. But what happens when the one meant to hold you up learns how to kick you down and smile while doing it? I remember the look on Mama's face that night. The night I was told to pack my things, as if 19 years of loyalty and love could fit into a suitcase. And all because my brother, sweet as sugar and twice as sticky, put on a show for their sympathy. He cried. Oh, he cried. But I didn't. Not that night. Not until the day I stood tall in court, the truth in my hand like a sword, and said, "Tell him again, Ben. Knowing how you wept." I was watering my lilies the morning the letter came. July's sun was already pushing past the curtains, making little golden puddles on the floor. Muffin, my cat, not a pastry, curled at my feet, pawing lazily at the envelope I'd dropped. The handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, slanted, and overly ornate, like someone trying too hard to look grown. Ben's handwriting. My brother. Now I hadn't heard from Ben in nearly 3 years, not since that courtroom dance where truth and lies did a cruel little waltz. But there it was, his name in the return corner, sitting smug as ever. I stared at it a while. My coffee went cold in my hand, but I didn't notice. The past has a way of sneaking up on you, don't it? You think you've locked it away, swept it under the rug, but it always finds the cracks. And that letter, it was a crack wide open. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I poured another cup, sat down by the window, and let the memories roll in like thunderclouds. 3 years ago, I walked out of my childhood home with nothing but a duffel bag and a heartbeat full of betrayal. Mama couldn't even look me in the eye. Daddy had already passed, bless him, or I like to think he would have known better. And Ben, well, Ben had tears on his cheeks and a smirk in his soul. They said I stole. They said I lied. But all I'd done was uncover the truth Ben was trying to bury. And he buried me with it. Funny, ain't it? How fast love turns when lies wear a prettier dress. I wasn't the golden child. Never was. That was Ben's role from the cradle. Charming, clever, always so sensitive. Lord help me, he could cry on cue before he was out of pull-ups. And when the moment came, when I told Mama what he'd done, what he'd really done, he wept like he was being crucified. And she believed him. Of course she did. Because people don't want truth. They want comfort. That letter sat on my kitchen table for 2 more days. On the 3rd, I opened it. 5 lines. That's all he wrote. Ellie, I know I messed up. I need to see you. Mama's dying. She's asking for you. Well, mercy me. My name is Eleanor May Whitford, Ellie to most folks. I was born on a Monday in late spring, in a peach-colored house on the outskirts of Savannah. Mama said I came into the world quiet and wide-eyed, like I was already talking notes. Maybe I was. The world even back then felt too big for silence. My brother Benjamin came along 3 years later, loud as a trumpet and twice as dramatic. Blonde curls, dimpled smile, and a cry that could break a grown man's will. He had a way of twisting every adult around his chubby little finger, like a magician with a pocket full of winks. Mama adored him. Daddy was proud. And me? I watched. I learned. We grew up under live oaks and ceiling fans, in a house where Sundays meant pressed clothes and choir practice, and Mama's eyes could find you through walls if you got too quiet. We weren't rich, but Daddy worked double shifts at the plant, and Mama ran a sewing business from the porch. There was always cornbread on the stove and gospel on the radio. Ben was the light of that house. The kind of boy neighbors called special, and teachers doted on like he hung the stars himself. But behind closed doors he was different. Not cruel, no. Just slippery, like trying to hold water in your hands. He could cry over a scraped knee, then steal your allowance while you were distracted with Band-Aids. I remember once when we were about 8 and 11 he broke Mama's favorite vase. A wedding gift from her sister in Macon. When she came home and saw it shattered on the floor, Ben started sobbing like his puppy had died. "Ellie pushed me," he wailed, lip quivering like a flag in a storm. I hadn't even been in the room. Mama believed him. She always did. I scrubbed floors for a week while Ben got extra pie. Now don't get me wrong, I loved my brother. I really did. But love, I learned, ain't blind. It's just patient. And patience wears thin. As we got older, I became the quiet one, the dependable one. The one who picked up Mama's medicine, who cleaned up after Daddy when his lungs got bad, who made straight A's and never asked for more than what was needed. Ben. He stayed charming. And that charm opened doors I didn't even know existed. At 16, he had a girl in every church youth group. At 18, he had a scholarship to Auburn, 2 cars, neither of which he paid for, and the kind of smile that made mamas clutch their pearls, but only after they blushed. And me? I stayed behind. Daddy got sick the year Ben left for college. Lung cancer. Fast and cruel. I deferred school and took over his care. I watched a man who once carried iron beams with his bare hands turn into someone who couldn't lift his coffee mug. Ben came home once during that year. Once. For Christmas. Brought Mama a gold bracelet, brought me a scarf still with the tag on. Took 3 selfies with Daddy, posted them online with captions like, "Grateful for family." Then he left again before New Year's. Daddy passed in March. Quietly at home with my hand in his. I held it together for Mama. I made the arrangements, handled the calls. Ben didn't make the funeral. He said his exams were the same week. Daddy would understand, he texted. I nearly threw the phone across the room. But still, Mama cried into his voicemail that night. "Just call me, baby. I miss your voice." I swallowed my anger. For her. But resentment has roots, my dear. And mine were growing deep. The first real fracture, the kind that doesn't just sting but scars, came the summer after Ben graduated. He came back home with a degree in marketing and a confidence so slick it could have sold sand to the beach. Mama threw him a barbecue out back, invited half the church, even made Daddy's favorite peach cobbler. Ben showed up an hour late, smelling like bourbon and some woman's perfume, wearing sunglasses indoors and talking like he'd been born famous. He hugged Mama, kissed her cheek, and when she asked how long he planned to stay, he smiled and said, "A few months, maybe. I need to reset before my next big move." That few months turned into a year. Then 2. Ben never paid rent. Never washed a dish. He'd sleep until noon, then head out networking, which, best I could tell, meant drinking at bars with old classmates and borrowing money he never paid back. Mama defended him at every turn. "He's just figuring himself out," she'd say, her voice soft, tired. "He's got big dreams, Ellie. He just needs time." And me? I was 25 and working double shifts at the clinic. Still in that same childhood room, still folding towels and fixing supper. Watching my brother get praise for potential while I broke myself in half trying to be dependable. Then came the money. It started small. A missing $40 from Mama's purse. Then the grocery money came up short. I noticed her skipping pills to stretch the prescription. One day, I saw Ben leaving her bedroom with her checkbook in hand. I confronted her. "Mama, he's draining you dry." She flinched like I'd slapped her. "He's family. He's using you. He's my son." I almost laughed. "And what am I?" She didn't answer. I kept quiet after that. Until the day I opened the mailbox and found an overdue notice from the bank. Mama's mortgage. Months behind. That night, I waited till Ben stumbled home reeking of liquor and lies. "You need to stop," I told him, standing between him and the stairs. He blinked at me, sluggish, confused. "Stop what?" "Taking from her." He scoffed. "Don't be dramatic, Ellie. It's not like I'm stealing." "You are." He leaned in, voice low and poisoned. "You're just bitter 'cause I got the love you wanted." I slapped him. Hard. Years of silence behind that palm. He stared at me, stunned. Then smirked. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." The next morning, Mama wouldn't look at me. She was crying on the porch, Ben's arm around her, his voice trembling as he told her I'd hit him, that I'd lost it and tried to ruin him, that he feared for his safety. And she believed him. Ellie, she said, broken and small, maybe it's best if you leave for a while. I packed that night. 19 years of love and labor shoved into a duffel.
No jugudbie.
No defense. Just the sound of Ben's fake sniffles echoing down the hall as Mama turned away. I lived in a friend's guest room for months after that. Started rebuilding from scraps. And then a year later I got a call. From a lawyer. Ben had been arrested for fraud. Credit cards. Identity theft. Loans taken out in Mama's name. Thousands. And just like that the mask fell. I stood in court 2 months later, called as a witness. Told my story under oath. Watched his tears dry under cross-examination. Saw Mama's face as truth finally clawed its way through the fog. That's where the hook began. But mercy me, my dear. The real story hadn't even started yet. The courtroom smelled like old wood and cheap perfume, the kind Mama used to dab behind her ears on Sunday mornings. Funny, the things you notice when your whole world's unraveling in front of strangers. I sat in the second row, clutching my statement like it was rosary beads. My palms were slick. My spine felt like glass. And at the defendant's table, there he was.
Ben.
Hair slicked back, suit too crisp for a man who wore guilt like a second skin. His eyes flitted past mine, blank as frost.
No epalegi. No recognition.
Just calculation. Like he was already scheming how to turn this into a new sob story. Mama sat beside him. That nearly broke me. She looked tired. Older than I remembered. Her hair, once the color of red clay, had thinned and gone silver. She wore her favorite lilac dress, the one Ben had bought her years ago, probably with one of those stolen cards. She wouldn't meet my gaze. I don't know what hurt more. That she was still defending him, or that I understood why. You see, Mama came from a generation where family came first, even if it meant swallowing truth like vinegar. She was raised to believe love could fix anything. That forgiveness was holy. And Ben knew that. He'd been using her beliefs like a ladder, climbing over her decency to save himself. The prosecutor rose, cleared her throat, and said, "We'd like to call Miss Ellie Whitford to the stand." My legs moved before my heart did. I took the stand. Swore the oath. And then I looked at Ben. Really looked. His expression was polite. Polished. Like a man who'd already written the ending in his head. I began. "I'm here today because my brother stole from our mother. Not once. Not by accident. But repeatedly. And he lied to cover it." The room quieted. I heard a sniffle. Not from Ben, but from the woman 3 rows back holding a notepad. I told them everything. About the checks. The forged documents. The loan in Mama's name that nearly cost her the house. How he'd come home with gifts he couldn't afford, while the lights got cut off in our kitchen. How I'd begged Mama to see it. And how Ben had turned her against me with a single crocodile tear. Ben shifted. Smiled faintly. Crossed his legs. Like it was a show and he'd seen it before. Then the prosecutor pulled out the bank statements. Printed proof. Signatures. Loan records. The room turned colder. Ben's attorney tried to object. Said the evidence was circumstantial. That the account could have been hacked. Then they brought out the voicemail. The one Ben had accidentally left on a mutual friend's phone. Drunk. Bragging. She thinks I'm still the golden boy. I could tell her I'm Jesus and she'd bake me a damn pie. Mama gusped. Audible. Ben's head snapped toward her. That was the first time I saw fear in his eyes. When court recessed for lunch, I stepped outside. Leaned against a brick pillar, staring up at the gray sky like it might offer comfort. I felt hollow. I didn't want revenge. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted Mama to say, "I'm sorry." But she hadn't. Not yet. The door behind me opened. Ellie. It was her. She walked up slow, hands clasped like she was holding something delicate. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't want to know." I nodded. "I know." A beat. I thought if I protected him, it meant I hadn't failed. "You didn't fail him," I said gently. "He failed you." She started to cry. Not the soft tears she shed for show, but the hard ones. the kind that cracked the soul open. That was the beginning of her turning. But mercy me, my dear, it was far from the end. The second half of the trial moved faster than the first, like a train picking up steam on a downhill grade. Every new witness added weight to the case. Old friends who loaned Ben money they never saw again. A former landlord who testified about eviction and unpaid rent. Even his college roommate, trembling and tight-jawed, admitted Ben had once bragged about tricking his mama into refinancing the house. The more they spoke, the more mama shrank beside him. I sat in the front row now, no longer hiding in the shadows. I was done being the quiet girl in the background of my own story. But there was one thing left to do. When the judge asked if I had any closing remarks as the victim's family, I stood again. My legs shook but my voice didn't. I used to think family meant protection, that it meant no matter what someone did, you stood by them. But I've learned loyalty without accountability is just enabling. I turned and looked right at Ben. You cried your fake tears and the world bent for you. You hurt mama, stole from her, from me, from people who trusted you. And every time we offered grace, you took it like a tool or a weapon. He looked at me then. Eyes narrowed, jaw tight. Not the charming boy of mama's dreams, but the man he really was. I finished. You've made a life out of lying, Ben. But today we told the truth. The courtroom didn't clap. Didn't need to. The silence was louder than applause. The judge called for a recess, and when I stepped outside, the air hit me like baptism. I walked over to Mama. She stood alone by the steps, arms crossed, eyes red. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. I think I knew, she said. Deep down. I just didn't want it to be true. I touched her hand. That's what love does. It hopes. She turned to me, eyes trembling. Can you ever forgive me? I swallowed the lump in my throat. I already have, Mama. I just needed you to see me again. We held each other then. Right there on those courthouse steps, where the truth had finally been set loose. But inside my brother sat alone. The jury came back the next day. Guilty. 6 counts of fraud. Restitution and jail time. Ben wept. Real tears this time. The kind no one rushed to wipe away. As they let him out in cuffs, his eyes searched for someone, anyone, to save him. But Mama never stood. And I never blinked. Grief is a shapeshifter. Sometimes it wails. Sometimes it just sits beside you in silence, heavy and uninvited. And after the trial, grief moved into Mama's house like a relative who wouldn't leave. She spent her days rearranging picture frames, as if putting Ben's childhood photos in new places might rewrite the past. Sometimes I'd hear her talking to herself in the kitchen, half prayers, half apologies. Other times she'd just stare out the window at nothing, her hand resting on the armrest like she was holding the ghost of her boy. I moved back in 2 weeks after the sentencing. Not because I missed the house, mercy no. Too many shadows. Too many echoes. But Mama needed care. The truth had broken something open in her, and it didn't close easily. We settled into a rhythm. Mornings with tea. Afternoons in silence. Evenings with soft music playing low, like the soundtrack to a life slowly stitching itself back together. But some wounds resist stitching. One night I found Mama in Ben's old room. She was sitting on the edge of his unmade bed, holding one of his high school trophies in her lap. Most likely to succeed. He was so smart, she whispered. So full of charm. How did I miss it, Ellie?
He sat beside her.
Because you loved him. And he knew how to make that love feel like proof. Her shoulders trembled. Did I create him or destroy him? I took the trophy from her lap and set it down. You gave him everything, Mama. He just never learned how to give anything back. She cried again, but this time she let me hold her. That was the first time she didn't pull away. Around that same time the letters started. From jail. Ben wrote once a week. Neat, slanted handwriting like always. Sometimes 2 pages, sometimes 10. They always began the same way. Ellie, I know you hate me, but please read this anyway. I never responded. I'd burned the first one before I could finish it. The second I tore in half. But by the third, curiosity got the better of me. He wrote about his cellmate, about jail food, about how cold the floors got at night. He wrote about childhood memories, trying to paint them in golden hues, as if nostalgia might buy him redemption. And buried between the lines were flickers of something real. I keep dreaming of Daddy's funeral. I see you holding his hand. I should have been there. Mama looked at me today like I was a stranger. I finally understand what that feels like. But then came the bait. If you could just talk to the judge for me, maybe write something for my early release. There it was. The old Ben. The plea hidden in the apology. The self-preservation wrapped in sentiment. I folded the letter, placed it in the drawer with the others. I wasn't ready to forgive. And forgiveness, my dear, should never be coerced. Mama, however, did write back. At first cautiously, then more often. One afternoon, I found her in the garden, a letter in her lap and a faraway look in her eyes. He says he's changed. I knelt beside her, tugging a weed from the marigolds. He's good with words. I know that, she said. But I'm his mother. I have to hope. Hope I thought could be holy. But it could also be a trap. And as much as I wished I could believe him, something in my gut still said this wasn't over. Because the thing about manipulators, they don't grieve. They calculate. And Ben had always been a master at the long game. The wind changed that September. Not just the air but something underneath it. The energy. The quiet. Mama started smiling again, but not in the way she used to. Not wide and full of life. More like she was borrowing someone else's smile, just to get through the day. And Ben's letters kept coming. Week after week, thicker now. Poems. Bible verses. Childhood drawings he said he'd recreated from memory. His words were laced with remorse, longing, carefully crafted humility. He signed them "Your brother" always and included a postscript in nearly every one. Please let Mama visit. She needs to see I've changed. First, Mama wouldn't speak of it. But one morning over warm oatmeal and cinnamon, she said softly, he asked if I could come next month. Said he wants to look me in the eyes. I didn't answer right away. Then, and do you want to see him? Her spoon clinked against the bowl. She took a slow breath. I don't know. Part of me does. Part of me's scared I'll see that same boy and forget what he became. I nodded. Then maybe wait. Until all of you is ready. Not just the mother part. She nodded too. But a week later, I found her in her room, trying on her church dress and brushing her hair with trembling hands. I just need to know, she said. I need to look at him and see if there's something left of the boy I raised. She went. Alone. And when she came back, she looked older. He cried, she said. Held my hands the whole time. Said he was sorry for everything. Said he thinks about Daddy every night. And did you believe him? I asked. She paused. Then, I believe that he was sorry he got caught. But I don't know if he's sorry for what he did. The next day I opened one of his letters. He thanked me for letting Mama visit. He wrote about how healing it was. And then came the real reason he was writing. There's a parole hearing in February. If I could have just one letter of character reference, just one, I might have a chance. Ellie, please. I felt my jaw clench. He didn't want reconciliation. He wanted leverage. I showed the letter to Mama. Her face crumpled. I'm so tired, she whispered. So tired of choosing between my children. You don't have to choose, I said gently. You just have to stop protecting someone who doesn't protect you. That night, I took out every letter he'd sent. Spread them across the kitchen table. Read them one by one. Some parts were genuine. Some weren't. But at the bottom of one envelope, folded small like a secret, was a printout. An email chain. Between Ben and a lawyer. And in it, a line that turned my stomach cold. If I can get my sister on record as forgiving me, we can argue emotional duress and reduce sentencing. Play the remorse card hard. She's a soft spot. Always has been. He'd sent it weeks ago. By accident, maybe. Or maybe he thought I wouldn't read that far. But I did. And that was the last letter I ever opened. Some betrayals don't scream. They whisper. Soft and slick like a snake in grass. Finding that email, that single damning line, snapped something clean inside me. Not with fire but with frost. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat there at Mama's kitchen table. A dozen letters around me like mourners, and felt the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. I kept it to myself at first. Not because I was protecting him, mercy no, but because I needed to be sure Mama was strong enough to hear it. To finally face what kind of man her baby had become. Instead, I focused on her health. The doctors had warned us already. Her heart was fragile, her lungs weaker now. Stress carved at her like wind on sandstone. So I made her tea. I read to her at night. I helped her into bed and out again each morning. But grief doesn't rest. Trickles through the cracks. And then came the call. Ben's parole hearing had been scheduled. February 12th. Valentine's week, the irony not lost on me. A representative from the prison called to confirm our attendance. They mentioned that Ben had requested both of us to be there, and had already submitted a list of references including my name. But I didn't submit anything, I said, confused. There was a pause on the other end. Well, the officer said carefully, he included a signed letter from you. It's already on file. My heart stopped. I understand, ma'am, but you'll have the chance to confirm or contest anything at the hearing. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. He forged it. He forged my letter. My signature. My name. I pulled out the email printout again. That smug, calculated sentence. She's a soft spot. Always has been. That was the moment I knew. He wasn't trying to rebuild anything. He wasn't crawling toward redemption. He was pulling the same strings, using our names like tools, our emotions like currency. And he was betting again that our silence would shield him. Well, not this time. I showed Mama everything. The email. The fake letter. The call from the prison. At first she just stared. Then she covered her mouth and whispered, "Oh Ben, what have you done?" Her body folded in on itself, like grief had stolen her bones. "I'm so sorry, Mama," I said, holding her. "But we have to stop this. We have to say it out loud this time." She nodded slowly. "You're right. No more covering. No more pretending." We contacted the parole board. Submitted a written objection. Attached the evidence. I even went down to the courthouse and gave a formal statement, swearing that no letter had come from me, and that I opposed his release. It was terrifying. Not because I feared Ben, but because I feared what it would do to Mama to watch him fall again. But the truth was already in motion. The day of the hearing came gray and cold. February wind biting at our cheeks as we walked up the stone steps of the parole board building. Inside it was quiet. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The board sat behind a long desk like judges in a makeshift courtroom. Ben was brought in wearing khaki prison clothes, thinner than I remembered. He scanned the room, eyes flitting to me, to Mama, to the empty chair beside him where he must have hoped I'd be sitting. He looked confused, then annoyed. Then, when the forged letter was brought out, furious. He began. The board held up the documents. "You submitted this as evidence." His lawyer tried to recover, claimed it was a clerical error, that Ben misunderstood the process. But the damage was done. I stood, gave my statement. Calm, clear. I do not support his release. I believe his remorse is a performance, and that my name was used without consent. Again. Mama followed. Her voice shook, but her words didn't. "My son needs help," she said, tears tracing her cheeks. "But not freedom. Not yet." When we walked out, the sky had lightened. Just a little. And behind us, Ben remained. Still good with tears. But this time, not a soul reached to catch them. After the hearing, we drove home in silence. Mama stared out the window, her hand resting on the armrest, her fingers twitching now, and then like they wanted to hold something that wasn't there. I knew that feeling. That ache for a person who's still alive but lost to you in every way that matters. At a red light, she finally spoke. "I saw him cry when they denied the parole. I kept my eyes on the road." "I know. But this time," she continued, her voice barely above a breath, "it felt different. Like watching someone cry at their own reflection." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. When we got home, she walked into the house without a word, straight to her bedroom. I gave her space. Sometimes grief needs quiet company, not conversation. Later that night, I found her sitting at the kitchen table. Her glasses off, letter in hand. Not one of Ben's this time. One of mine. A birthday card I'd given her years ago. I'd drawn lilies on the front, written a little poem on the inside. She held it like a prayer. "You were always the steady one," she whispered. "Even when I was too blind to see it."
He sat beside her.
"You don't have to make up for anything, Mama. You're here now. That's what matters." She reached for my hand, her grip softer than it used to be but full of something stronger than blood. "I don't know what's next," she said. "For him. For us. We start again," I said. "We plant new roots." She nodded, slow and solemn. "And what about him?" I looked toward the window where the moon hung low and pale. "He's got his road to walk. But this time he'll walk it alone." The days after the hearing were quiet, but not empty. Mama began going on walks again, just around the block at first, then to the park. She brought home wildflowers once, said they reminded her of me. I took on more hours at the clinic, repainted my old room in soft greens and golds, let the light back in one brushstroke at a time. And the letters? They stopped. For the first time in nearly a year, the mailbox was empty of his words. I imagine he realized there was no one left to fool. Or maybe, mercy me, he just ran out of ways to lie. I kept the last one he sent before the hearing. Not because it held truth, but because it marked the end of something. I tucked it in a shoebox beneath my bed. Not to read. Not to reopen. Just to remember. Because some stories don't deserve to be rewritten. They deserve to be left exactly as they were. A lesson carved into the bones of the past. And so the boy who cried fake tears finally met the truth he'd spent his life outrunning. This time the tears were real. And no one brought him a handkerchief. The thing about consequences, my dear, is they don't always come in a flash. Sometimes they settle in like morning fog, slow, quiet, hard to see through, but they're all the same. After the parole hearing, life didn't snap back like a rubber band. There was no grand celebration, no sense of victory. Just a silence that hung in the house like a thick curtain. Mama stopped wearing the lilac dress. She boxed up Ben's trophies, his photos, the dusty ribbon from his 5th grade spelling bee. She didn't throw them away, not yet, but she did put them in the attic. Out of sight, not out of mind. "I need space," she told me one afternoon, her voice distant. "Not to forget him, but to remember myself." That hit me like a hymn. Because for so long, Mama's identity had been wrapped around Ben's glow. His charm. His endless, hungry need for forgiveness. And now, with the truth laid bare and the mask stripped clean, she was left facing herself. Who she'd been, what she'd allowed, and what she'd lost. She started seeing a therapist from the church. A gentle woman named Sister Corinne, who wore blue scarves and spoke like a prayer in motion. "I talk more in that hour than I have in years," Mama confessed one day, her cheeks pink from the walk home. "Turns out guilt and grief look mighty similar when you never sit down and name them." I smiled. "I'm proud of you." She looked surprised. "For what?" "For choosing yourself." Meanwhile, I was mending in my own quiet ways. I started journaling again. Every morning before work, I'd sit by the windowsill with my tea, and let the pen move. Not just about Ben, but about Daddy and Mama, and the versions of myself I'd shed to survive them all. I made peace with that younger Ellie. The one who'd begged to be believed, who packed her life in a duffel and walked out of the only home she'd ever known. I forgave her for staying silent too long. And I thanked her for not losing her light. That spring I adopted another cat. A rescue tabby named Clementine. Muffin had passed a few months prior. Old age and a soft exit, curled beside me like always. Clementine was rowdier, loud, a climber. She filled the house with new sounds, new energy. And mercy me, she had a fondness for Mama, curling into her lap each night like she knew her heart needed softness. Mama laughed more. Sang to herself in the garden. Started writing letters, not to Ben but to herself. Pages she never mailed. Folded neatly into a box labeled "Truths I Owe Myself." And then on a soft April morning a letter did arrive. Postmarked from prison. From Ben. But this one was different. Not a plea. Not a performance. Just one line. "I understand now why you stopped writing."
No manipulasten.
No ask. I read it twice, then handed it to Mama. She didn't cry. She just nodded. "That's the first honest thing he said in years." We didn't write back. Not because we were cruel. But because the story no longer belonged to him, it belonged to us, and we were still writing it. Healing, I've learned, is not a straight road. It curves, doubles back. Sometimes you take 3 steps forward only to trip over a memory and fall face first into yesterday. But we kept walking it anyway. That summer, the garden bloomed like it hadn't in years. Marigolds, zinnias, and Mama's beloved lilies burst up from the earth as if they, too, had been waiting for a reason to come alive again. We planted herbs near the porch, rosemary, mint, thyme, and every time the breeze blew, the scent of possibility floated through the air. One evening, I found Mama sitting under the magnolia tree with her journal in her lap and her hands dirt-streaked from pruning. "He used to sit right there," she said, nodding toward a patch of sunlit grass, "reading those detective comics. Said he wanted to be a lawyer one day." I didn't respond. Some memories don't need correcting, just company. She continued, quieter now. "I think I clung to that dream longer than he did, believed in it for both of us." I leaned back in the lawn chair, my fingers twined in Clementine's fur. "It's all right to grieve what could have been," I said. "But we can't keep dragging it behind us like a suitcase of ghosts." She smiled then, small but real. "I never said thank you." "For what?" "For staying. For standing. For telling the truth when I couldn't." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "You got there in the end. That's what matters." Later that week, we were invited to a community dinner at the church. We hadn't been in over a year, not since the trial, and the idea of facing all those curious eyes made my stomach knot. But Mama said, "Let them look. I'm done hiding." So we went. The reception was quieter than I expected. A few hugs, some hesitant smiles. But no one brought up Ben. No one whispered. It felt like stepping back into life after a long hibernation. Sister Corinne found us at the dessert table. Her smile was wide, ice kind. "You've both weathered a storm," she said gently. "But the soil's richer after the rain, you know. Things grow better." I liked that. The idea that what breaks us might also feed what comes next. As the seasons shifted, so did we. I found a new rhythm: work, writing, tending the garden, long talks with Mama on the porch. We didn't speak of Ben much anymore. Not because we were avoiding him, but because the story had moved on. We were no longer defined by the damage he caused. We were defined by what we rebuilt in its wake. And when the next letter came, 6 months after the last, we read it quietly, then folded it up and placed it in the same box with the others. Not out of malice. Out of mercy. Because sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for someone who's hurt you is nothing at all. The first frost of November came early that year. I remember waking to find the garden glazed in silver, every bloom kissed with ice. The roses bowed like dancers at curtain call, their petals brittle at the edges. It was beautiful. And sad. And true to the season we were in. Mama had taken to writing every morning now. She'd sit by the window wrapped in a shawl Daddy once wore, a cup of Earl Grey steaming beside her. I never asked what she wrote. That was her business. Her way of clearing space inside herself. And me? I was learning how to live without the ache of waiting. Waiting to be understood. Waiting for apologies that never came. Waiting for people to become who I needed them to be. Instead, I started asking myself what I needed. And listening, really listening, to the answers. I took long walks before sunrise. I let silence sit beside me at the table instead of filling it with noise. I even started attending a small poetry circle at the library downtown. I didn't share, not at first, but I listened. And slowly, I began to hear echoes of my own story in the verses of strangers. There was one woman, Marcy, mid-60s, purple glasses, always smelled like lavender and orange peels, who read a piece about forgiving her sister after a falling out. She ended it with a line that hit me like a stone in a still pond. "Some people leave you bleeding. Others teach you how to dress your wounds." I carried that line with me for weeks, because that's what Mama and I were doing day by day, dressing our wounds. Together. One night, just before Christmas, I found her standing at the window watching the snow begin to fall. She looked like a statue carved from soft grief and softer hope. "He wrote again," she said quietly. I nodded. "You going to read it?" "Not tonight," she said. "Tonight, I want to remember who we were before the hurt. She turned to me, eyes shining. Do you remember that time Daddy made a sled out of a metal trash can lid and tied it to the back of the truck? I laughed. And you screamed at him for being reckless? He said, let them fly a little, May. They'll learn how to land. We both smiled. It felt good. Sharing a memory untouched by Ben. One that belonged only to the three of us, in a time before lies, before cracks in the foundation. I think, Mama said slowly, I finally stopped hoping Ben will become someone he's not, and started mourning who he could have been. That, my dear, was healing. Not erasure. Not pretending. Just mourning the truth and choosing to go on anyway. Christmas came quiet that year. No big tree, no flashing lights. Just a wreath on the door, a plate of ginger cookies, and the gentle hum of Nat King Cole on the old record player. Mama made a pot roast just like Daddy used to. We sat by the fire with Clementine curled up between us, her tail flicking like a metronome to the rhythm of the logs cracking. It wasn't the holiday we used to have, loud, crowded, filled with gifts and Ben's too charming grin. But mercy me, it was peaceful. And peace, I was learning, is its own kind of miracle. That night I gave Mama a gift I'd been working on for weeks. A journal. Not blank but full. I'd taken all the letters she'd written to herself, the truths I owe myself, and transcribed them into a leather-bound book. I added photos, old recipes in her handwriting, snippets of our garden plans, dried petals from the first rose she planted after the trial. She held it like it was something sacred. You turned my grief into something beautiful, she whispered, tears spilling slow and silent. No, I said softly. You did that. I just made it easier to hold. She kissed my forehead, and for the first time in years I saw her as more than just Mama. I saw her as May Whitford, woman, widow, warrior, reclaiming her own story, one page at a time. As the new year approached, I sat down to write my own truths. Not for anyone else. Just for me. I wrote about what it meant to be the quiet child, the one who carried too much without asking. I wrote about the ache of betrayal, the slow thaw of forgiveness, and the strange freedom that comes when you stop needing someone to change in order for you to heal. And I wrote about Ben. Not as the villain, not as the brother I once adored, but as a lesson, a living, breathing reminder that love without boundaries isn't love, it's surrender. And I was done surrendering. The last day of the year, Mama and I stood on the porch wrapped in quilts, sipping cocoa as the town lit up with distant fireworks. She leaned her head against mine. We made it, she said. Yes, I replied. And we made something better from what tried to break us. No more letters came after that. No more questions. Just the quiet, steady hum of life moving forward. And that, my dear, is sometimes the bravest thing of all. Spring didn't just arrive that year, it burst. The dogwoods bloomed early, bright as blessings, and the bees came thick like praise songs. Mama's garden was a riot of color, and Clementine took to chasing butterflies like it was her life's purpose. The house smelled of lemon oil and warm bread again. And for the first time in years it felt like a home that had chosen to live. I found myself smiling without realizing it, singing to myself while folding laundry, writing poems on napkins and grocery receipts. There was a lightness in my chest where a weight used to be. That's the thing about reckoning. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives quiet as a bloom, full of truth and trembling. Mama was changing too. One morning in March, she came to the breakfast table holding a stack of Ben's letters, the ones she had read, and the ones she hadn't. Her hands didn't shake. Her face didn't fold with guilt. I think I'm ready, she said. For what? To let go. We sat on the porch steps with a tin bucket between us. One by one, she fed the letters to a small flame. Not with spite. With ceremony. He's my son, she said softly. But I can't keep feeding the fire that burned us. The wind picked up and carried the ashes into the sky. They scattered over the garden, the porch, the dirt where Mama had once buried her trust. And somehow it felt holy. Around that time, I was offered a promotion at the clinic, shift supervisor. More hours, more responsibility. It scared me, if I'm honest. Not because I doubted my skills, but because for so long I'd lived in the shadow of a life defined by survival. Thriving was unfamiliar. But I took it. And I was good at it. Mama threw a little celebration, just the two of us and Clementine, with pound cake and mint tea. She pulled out Daddy's old Polaroid and snapped a picture of me by the garden gate. "You look like yourself again," she said, proud and wistful. I smiled. "I think I'm still learning who that is." She nodded. "Then keep learning." The best women I've known never stopped. Then came the call. Ben had been transferred, a lower security facility. Good behavior. I could hear it in Mama's breath when the officer told her. That flutter of hope, that quiet rise in the chest when the heart's not quite done breaking. After she hung up, she looked at me. "I'm not going to visit," she said. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." I didn't push. That was her decision. Her boundary. But that night I wrote Ben a letter. The first and only one I ever sent. It was short. "You taught me how to find my voice by trying to silence it. You taught me how to stand by knocking me down. I don't hate you, Ben. But I won't protect you anymore. We're writing new stories now. You're not in mine." I mailed it the next morning and felt lighter than I had in a decade. Not because I wanted revenge, but because the reckoning had come, and we had survived it. The days rolled on with a kind of quiet steadiness, like a stream finding its rhythm after the rain. I began to mark time not by the bitterness of old wounds, but by gentler things, the way the sunlight touched the porch just right at 3 p.m., the soft purring of Clementine curled against Mama's ankles, the way laughter had slowly returned to our conversations, like a guest who'd finally come back home. That summer we rebuilt the garden fence. The old one had rotted clear through, posts splintered and leaning like old men who'd seen too much. We pulled it down piece by piece, sweating through the heat, pausing often to laugh, to sip sweet tea, to remember. "I always thought fences were for keeping things out," Mama said one day as we hammered in a new board. "Maybe sometimes they're for protecting what's within," I answered. She nodded. "That's what you've been, you know. My fence. All this time." I didn't say anything. Just pressed the last nail into place and stepped back to admire what we'd made. It wasn't perfect, but it was strong. Honest. Just like us. The letter from Ben came in July. Plain white envelope. No return address. My name written neat as ever, but something about the handwriting had shifted. It leaned heavier. Less sure. I sat with it for a full day before opening it. Inside were 3 sentences. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope you're happy now. Truly." I stared at the page for a long while. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't. Not anymore. I tucked it into the back of my journal. Not as a keepsake but as a record. Of what was. Of what we'd overcome. Not all endings are final, but this one felt settled. Like a chapter you close not with a slam but with a sigh. August brought rain. The kind that falls heavy and warm, soaking the earth deep down to its bones. The garden thrived. Mama baked again. I signed up for a night class in creative writing. And slowly, gently, a life once shaped by grief began to take the shape of something else entirely. Hope. Real rooted hope. Not the fragile kind that waits on others to change. The kind that grows from your own 2 hands, watered by truth and boundaried by love. One evening I stood out by the fence, the wind rustling through the marigolds, the sky stretching wide and soft above me. I thought of Ben. Not with anger. Not even sorrow. Just a quiet understanding. He had made his choices. And so had I. And mercy me, mine had brought me here. Whole. Free. Home. There's a hush that comes with healing. Not the kind born of silence but of settling. Like dust after a storm, or the way the world holds its breath in the hour just before dawn. That was our life now. Mama and I had built a rhythm, a slow and sacred choreography of ordinary days. She'd read on the porch each morning, wrapped in her knit shawl, glasses low on her nose. I'd pack my lunch for work, feed Clementine, water the marigolds still blooming wild into the autumn. Some evenings we'd sit together in the den and just be. No news.
No noise.
Just the occasional jazz record and the shared comfort of presence. No letters came from Ben that fall. None at Christmas. None in the spring. And in that absence we felt peace. Not the kind that demands forgetting, but the kind that blooms from releasing someone who never intended to stay rooted in love. One Sunday in April, our pastor asked if anyone in the congregation wanted to share a testimony. Mama stood. Now that, my dear, nearly knocked the air out the room. May Whitford, who hadn't stood at that mic in years, walked slow but sure down the aisle, voice steady as wind chimes. She didn't name names, didn't point fingers, but she told the truth, soft and unflinching. I spent a long time trying to fix a story that didn't want to be healed, she said. I thought love meant sacrifice, that if I gave enough it would be enough. But I learned that real love, holy love, has boundaries. It honors truth, and sometimes it says no more and means it. People wiped tears. Some nodded, some closed their eyes. And me? I stood in the back, hands clasped, heart pounding, proud. Because the woman at that microphone wasn't just my mama, she was proof. Proof that the quietest strength can be the fiercest. That healing is not forgetting but choosing to rise anyway. That summer we hosted a garden tea. Just a few neighbors, friends from church, the poetry circle ladies. We served lemon scones and cucumber sandwiches, poured sweet tea into mason jars, and set up folding chairs between the blooms. It was simple, beautiful, and somewhere between the second round of pie and the third rendition of At Last on the record player, I realized something. We had done it. We had climbed out of the wreckage. Not untouched, mercy no, but unbroken. We had become the kind of women who could survive loss, betrayal, and the long, lonely climb toward truth, and still host a garden tea with laughter in our lungs. That, to me, was grace. Late that summer, Mama got a letter. Not from Ben. From the State Correctional Board. It was formal and personal, the kind printed in grayscale ink on thick government weight paper. It simply stated that Ben would be released the following spring. Good behavior. Time served. There was no decision to be made. No appeal. No say in it at all. Mama folded the letter with trembling hands, set it down gently, then looked at me. I thought I'd feel something, she said. Fear. Relief. Anger. But I just feel empty. I nodded. That's what peace feels like when you've been bracing for a storm too long. She took a breath and exhaled like she was laying down a burden she'd carried too far, for too long. What if he shows up? She asked, barely a whisper. Then we don't open the door, I said, calm and sure. She nodded, and that was that. We didn't dread it. We didn't plan around it. We just lived. March came, and with it, another bloom of lilies. A surprise bouquet from the poetry circle ladies. They'd signed the card, to strength wrapped in softness, you taught us what healing looks like. Mama cried when she read it. The good kind of tears. The kind that water something deep. And when Ben's release date passed and no letter came, no knock on the door, no shadow on the porch, we simply went on.
No dramatic finale.
No final act. Just life. Whole and unbothered. We planted sweet peas that weekend. Hung new wind chimes. Watched the clouds roll past with tea in our hands and quiet in our bones. I'd once thought closure came with confrontation. But mercy me, I was wrong. Closure came in the choice not to go back. Not to reread. Not to rebleed. Closure came in the garden we grew with hands that had once only known how to hold grief. And when I looked at Mama, laughing gently at Clementine tangled in the marigolds, I saw it clear. We weren't surviving anymore. We were blooming. Last week I found one of Ben's letters tucked inside an old novel Mama had meant to donate, To Kill a Mockingbird, fittingly enough. It must have slipped between the pages years ago, forgotten like a receipt from a meal never eaten. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I walked it out to the garden, where the zinnias had started to reach for the sun, tall and bright and unashamed of how they'd grown. I dug a small hole near the roots of the rosemary bush and buried it there. Not in anger, not in ceremony, but in release. Some stories don't need revisiting. Some wounds don't need reopening. And some people, they stay in the past where they belong. As I stood there, hands in the dirt, the wind picked up, rustling the chimes and lifting the hem of my dress. I looked around at the life Mama and I had built, not perfect but honest. Not loud, but steady. A life anchored by truth. And I whispered, not to the sky, not to the ghost of what we lost, but to myself. We made it. Then I walked back inside. The kettle was whistling. The cat was napping. Mama was humming along with the radio. And mercy me, my heart was light. If I was kicked out after my brother cried fake tears, so I made him cry real ones in court. Open something quiet in your soul. I'd be so grateful if you'd let me know what stayed with you. Leave a little note down below. Share this story with someone who's walked through betrayal and come out blooming. And if you'd like to sit with me again, for another long story stitched with sorrow and strength, don't forget to subscribe. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes, it's a garden grown in the silence after goodbye. Until next time, be gentle with yourself. You're already blooming more than you know.